SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome. We will discuss about the assessing heritage significance and values, part 1. Remember last time in the last lecture we talked about different types of values, heritage values and significance. So today we will talk about how to assess these values and significance and what is the role of that in management of the heritage and the cultural properties. If you remember that last lecture we talked about a temple in Japan in Kyoto, Kinkakuji temple. I said that it is a beautiful temple, the significance of it is that it is beautiful. At the same time I talked about the Itsukushima shrine in Japan, which I told that it is inspiring. I told that. But who am I to decide that which one is beautiful and which is inspiring? I can't say that this is somebody else can come up and say that no, that is beautiful too. So that means that we have to find out from a larger audience through different objective technologies and objective measurement techniques that what is really beautiful and what is inspiring, and the degree may vary. So that means that we have to objectively assess the significance and values of the cultural heritage. Just saying that I like it or I think it is beautiful or I think it is inspiring is not enough. So let us see, today we will talk about that. For example, in Shantiniketan also I said that the Upasana Griha or Mandir is beautiful, whereas Shamoli is different because it is inspiring. And the same questions happen, that who decides that which is inspiring and which is beautiful, and how, to what degree, because these are very, very subjective parameters. So also we must remember that while we are talking about the significance and the values, the role of conservation in public life, there is a gradual shift, that because just by the experts saying that this is has significance is not enough. Even there is a shifting tendency from cultural heritage and the heritage property as the social agents, and it should have an impact on the social and economic realms of the society. So the people, the community who are really the stakeholders or the caretakers of the heritage property, is very important to consider their values and significance. And we must remember that even if they are stakeholders, there are also different groups of stakeholders and there may be conflicting issues. So that is why it is very important that we, again I am saying that its objective assessment of the significance and values is very important. So also we must remember that the primary aim of the conservation practice is to preserve the values attributed to the heritage and these aspects that give significance to the objects, buildings, sites, landscape and tradition. Again I am saying that which are the aspects, which are the parameters which contribute to the value of either buildings or sites or landscape is very important to understand that. Now what are the values? Values basically are the qualities and characteristics in things, which are actually the attributes. A quantitative or qualitative factor or variable that provides a simple and reliable means to measure how well a desired outcome, value or criterion has been achieved or fulfilled. We must remember that this assessment of the significance and values happens at two stages. First of all, for identification of the cultural property, and later on that for monitoring purpose, that how well the values have been preserved. So the value assessment is very important, and as is saying that there can be qualitative and there can be quantitative aspects. So that means if we have to go for objective assessment not being totally subjective, we have to develop instruments for assessing the values and or performance of the conservation actions of complex assets such as structures, urban sites, cultural territories, landscape and collections of many types of objects, because there are very varied types of object and the scale also changes. So, we must understand that what are these instruments. So, let us talk about some of this. So, first of all, there is a task and there are certain things which are called tool. What are the tasks? The tasks are first of all identification, and this identification of the typology of the values, we have talked about different types of values and significance. It also should happen through the stakeholders consultation. That is very, very important, and that is what at the present, that is a very important role the community plays in that identification of the typology and the values and significance, along with the experts of course. Now, after the identification of these different types of values and significance of different types of properties and cultural properties and heritage properties or sites and areas, we also have to find out that what are the tasks. The task is elicitation and elaboration of the, and there are many cultural and economic tools and methods to do that. Following that, what is done is that, though I have said that it has to be objective, but it is not always possible to like quantitatively say this is number 5 or this has got 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10. Actually, it does not mean much. So, what is very important in case of the cultural sites, and it is to prepare a statement of significance, and that is absolutely important. And this statement of significance is a group process. It can't be done with individually. As I said that I thought that is beautiful and the other one is inspiring, is not enough. It has to be done through a systematic process, a transparent process, involving all the stakeholders into the process, and then finding out the statement of significance and the types, the degrees. The degrees, as I say, that it cannot be always quantitative. So, there are ways of saying that high, very high, moderate and other thing, but as I say that it has to be through a consultative process, and there has to be a sort of a very transparent process to see that what is there. So, that is there are various tools and techniques available. Now, what comes out of that is integration of the assessment and establishing a policy correlation between the values and the physical significance. Now, as I said that conservation is actually a process. What we see there as a structure, that is the product, but we must understand that it has gone through a process, and this process is very important, and the values are actually intangible aspects, and the physical objects, the structure or size and other, they embody those sort of intangible aspects, and that is where we have to understand the multiple types of value and viewed through the different people or different types of stakeholders. So, this brings us into two very important aspects. One is the physical condition assessment, because we are talking about structures which probably have been there through ages, through centuries, or sometimes it may be relatively new, but we have to understand the physical condition assessment of these structures. And then followed by that is also very important is the management context assessment, because it is not only important to know the value and prepare the statement of significance, also what is important is to understand that how it will be managed for posterity, for future generation and also for the present time. So, these two actually should be integrated, which we call the assessment of significance and establishing a policy correlationship. So, that means there has to be the indicators. That indicators, what is the indicators to? The one is the aims of conservation. We must through the indicators actually they dictate what is the aims of conservation, or vice versa. The aims of conservation are decided by the indicators. And also interrelated aspect is the values linked to the cultural heritage that we are trying to protect. So, these aims of conservation, the values linked to the cultural heritage that we are trying to protect, and the indicators, they actually are interrelated and one depends on the other. So, we must understand this aspect or this interrelationship. Let us take one example. We have talked about Shamoli and Shantiniketan, okay, which I said is an adobe structure. Now, at the moment, if one goes to Shantiniketan, they will see that it is covered under a tarpaulin. Why? Because yes, Archaeological Survey of India is doing for 2 or 3 years, it is doing the restoration of that and it is an adobe structure. So, it is actually liable to be get washed away by the rain, because when Rabindranath Tagore sort of designed it, he sort of thought it as an adobe structure. Over the years, and he actually, there is a writing that where he said that it is not supposed to be a permanent structure, it will dissolve over the time, but over the years it has attributed, it has got some other values which we will discuss, and people want to preserve it. Now, preserving it means that what do we do? How do you preserve the adobe structure, the roof and other things, and also over the years there have been some sort of repair works which have been carried out on that site. So, at the moment, because there is a lot of controversy and people are taking time, they are cautious, and so it is covered with the tarpaulin to protect it from the rainwater. Now, let us see, while we talked about this, we must understand what is the value. It is possible, there are so many approaches, it is possible that it can be covered, it can eternally be covered like that, or it can be covered, or the roof can replace, the adobe structure sort of can be replaced with some other permanent material. So, there are various ways of doing it, various approaches. Now, let us see what are the values, because as I said, the values actually decides what should be the management technique. Now, Tagore has really one value is that Tagore has experimented whether a permanent mud roof could be built instead of the fireproof and the then common thatch roof, because he was actually getting inspiration from the tribal huts and he wanted to experiment with that. So, it was a product which shows his experimentation with the adobe structure. At the same time, it is also the place where Tagore's summer retreat, he actually has adopted a lot of sustainable things, because the walls, within the walls are hollow pitchers which keep the place cool, there is a vacuum, and it is what is a very, very good technique to keep the inside cool. And also, as I say, this is an association with Tagore, and also Mahatma Gandhi had stayed with his wife twice when he visited that. So, that means that the value of that, if you try to do, one is the association, because it is association with Tagore, and also association with Mahatma Gandhi, and association because it is an example of an architectural or construction technique. So, these are the values of that. Its association is not only because it is a Tagore summer retreat or Mahatma Gandhi, it is also association because artists of Shantiniketan under Gurudev's guidance also had done a lot of relief work and artwork on his wall. So, there is an association with those artists also. So, we can say that if you talk about values of Shamoli, one is association, then the other is the architecture, aesthetics definitely, because though he got his inspiration from the tribal structure, but it is very unique, it's very different, it has got the remarkable contribution of Tagore's thought and aesthetic ideas, and because he has taken the inspiration, as you can see, from Ajanta Ellora and our classical architecture, and also because it is a history, and there can be some more values attributed to this structure. Then when we sort of assess these values, then actually these actually decide that what should be the way to preserve that. Should we really cover it to protect, to keep the original fabric, or should we replace that with other type of structure, because if you replace that with a other type of permanent modern material, that will actually intervene with Gurudev's idea of the adobe structure and his experimentation, because the value is the experimentation. And also we must understand another thing, the cultural significance of each place or site is constantly being reformulated due to the changing nature of the values. For example, Shamoli, when Gurudev built it, he had some other idea for building or experimenting this house. But over the years it has changed, and we can see from some of the old photographs that this window is there, which is actually has changed, and now some windows have been rebuilt, some doors have been rebuilt, they have been replaced and other things. So, there have been some sort of a minor changing. Now, the question comes, because it has been changing, so to which date, if we want to sort of repair it, to which date we should take it back. And there lies a very, very controversial issue and a very challenging issue, that when we are talking about the history of a structure, we must recognize that history means that it has spanned over a different periods, and we can't go back to only one particular time or date. We must respect all periods of history, and we have to see. So, these are great decision or very challenging decision which has to be taken while restoring or preserving a structure. Now, so what we have seen in Chamonix is the multiple types of value, and then that actually decides that how it should be managed, and the aim, indicators and the management are interrelated to each other. Now, let us talk about that. We talked about that this structure, that evaluation of the parameters and the criteria, the values the structural stakeholders confer, the values also we have established by this time, that is a multidimensional and multi-objective. So, it is actually multiple criteria which is difficult to capture with a single index. And also we must understand the types of indicators, some are quantifiable, some are objective and some are standardized. So, with these type of multiple criteria and complex situation, we must decide that what should be done to the structures. So, as we talked about that we have to elaborate, and there are many cultural methods. The major things what we must remember, that the area of assessment, the conservation of cultural significance, including both the fabric and the value. So, we must understand that one side we are talking about the fabric, for example, the Chamonix, which is an adobe structure, and on the other hand we are talking about the values, association value, construction, architectural, aesthetics and artistic values. So, we must talk about the fabric and the values ascribed to the cultural heritage, and also by this time we must also understand the economic impact, what are the economic impact, what are the social impact, and what are the environmental impacts. These actually are very important, and that is why while talking about that we will talk in detail later on the heritage impact assessment. Now, each of these areas requires different indicators and methodologies for assessment. So, if we try to sort of say that, like the conservation of cultural significance, we talked about the fabric and the values. So, both the fabric, the materials and the non-tangible values related to it, like I said in case of Chamonix, the architectural association, these are actually intangible aspects, both are important, interrelated. For example, as I said, the fabric in case of Chamonix is adobe, the non-tangible values are association with Tagore Gandhiji and the artist, and architecture, the construction technique. So, we must understand that how this sort of a product of Chamonix as a structure, how they sort of continue or they sort of embody the different values, and that actually will decide what should be done with this structure. So, the assessing the conservation of the fabric. So, first let us talk about the assessing the conservation of the fabric. This is still relatively easier, and a lot of work already have been done in this. So, when we talk about the assessing the conservation of the fabric, we must take these two aspects into consideration. One is the appropriateness of the conservation materials, because each material has its own challenges, own type of decay depending on which type of climate they are in, and the methods of intervention. Again, these two are very interrelated aspects, because as I said, there are a variety of the materials, there are types of decay, and there are different types of conservation process, which we will talk about later when we will go into the detail of the decay of the different types of materials. But also we must understand that while we are talking about the interrelated aspects of the fabric and the intangible aspects of the value and significance, We must also understand that this relevance of conserving the fabric varies across the cultures. It is not same, not uniform in different cultures. Some culture give more priority to the non-material values over the conservation of the fabric, and some cultures give a lot of importance to the conservation of fabric. So, let us take some of the examples. One of the very well known example in this aspect are the Shinto shrines of Japan. The Shinto shrines of Japan, actually there is a tradition where the buildings are demolished and reconstructed every 20 years. One would have sort of shudder at this thought that these old structures are demolished over 20 years and exactly reproduced on the same site. Now, why? And that is the way they continue. So, the fabric is not continuing. What is continuing is something else. What is continuing? They are maintaining the tradition and construction know-how rather than the material itself. So, it is a very inbuilt cultural tradition of Japan, of these Shinto shrines, and while they do that, while they sort of every 20 years they sort of reconstruct the temple according to the old practice, on one hand they continue to preserve the know-how and the skill. On the other hand, while this rebuilding process, there is a lot of sort of rituals, processions, the play and other things which happen, and these are integral part, these intangible aspects are integral part of this conservation process of the Shinto shrine. So, we must understand that this Shinto belief about the renewal of nature and living religious heritage is more important in their culture than preserving the fabric itself. So, that is why we say that culture to culture there are different sort of values, and the value they confer to a particular aspect of conservation or significance. So, this brings us to the question of, as I said, one is the fabric, another is the intangible heritage. While the fabric or the product is tangible, but the values and significance and these practices are intangible heritage. So, while talking about the intangible heritage, we must understand that these non-tangible values are related to it, and so that what is the recommendation? The recommendation should be the use of a combination of identifiable and measurable elements and accurate documentation techniques, so that the evaluation can be repeated over time. So, if you try to summarize that, we have seen that assessing the value is very important. Number one, there are different types of values and there are different types of way to find about the value. The involvement of the stakeholders, all type of stakeholders and community are very important to understand what are the values and significance, and values and significance can be varied. There can be various ways of finding out the values and significance. There can be tools and techniques, some are quantifiable, some are qualitative aspects, and then also we must understand the values and significance change over time, because even a product is continuously changing, and when it is changing we must understand what are the changes, how it has changed, what are the new values attributed to it. We must take that into consideration. At the same time, as we have shown that in case of Japan Shinto shrines, that the significance and value is not of something universal, because it changes from culture to culture. Each culture has its own way of looking at the heritage and the significance. Some may give a lot of importance to the fabric itself, some may give more importance to the intangible aspect of the renewing it or the associated rituals, beliefs and practices, and these actually make it so interesting, and we have to see that in combination, and that actually decides that what should be the management techniques of that. So, in our next lecture we will talk about that. Today we have talked about in this lecture these aspects. Next lecture we will talk about more of the intangible aspects of the heritage significance and how it sort of decides the management practice. Thank you.